Now, please welcome to the podium Rotary Past President and Director of Herb Gold Philanthropies, JoAnne Anton, to introduce our speakers.
We're good? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be back up here and with two really wonderful leaders. Today we get to hear from two of Milwaukee's foremost leaders, and they're going to talk to us about their unique organizations and the data that they track and how they are working to strengthen Milwaukee's story, economy, and community. They will highlight what the numbers have to say about the status of Milwaukee's Black and Brown communities. And they're going to provide more information about their work that is trying to improve the trend lines and strengthen the outcomes. Both of the organizations they represent are part of the MMAC's Region of Choice initiative, which is focused on improving the recruitment and retention and advancement of Black and Brown talent in our community and region. After I introduce our two speakers, each will give a brief overview, and then we're going to have a discussion. So let's give a warm Rotary welcome to Angela Adams. She is the Interim President of the African American Leadership Alliance of Milwaukee, which is a mouthful. So we are now going to call that AALAM for the rest of the program. Angela helped found the group. She served as the board chair and most recently was named Interim President. AALAM was founded back in 2017 as a network of leaders dedicated to developing and supporting Milwaukee's African American talent pool. Its vision is to make Milwaukee a global destination where African Americans thrive and prosper. The organization seeks to increase and retain our African American leaders in roles throughout all sectors. And one of the ways they do that is through the African American Leadership Program, of which Angela is an alumna. It's already produced 250 alumni that are serving in leadership roles throughout our community, and it's, I know, a matter of pride and accomplishment for the organization already. Angela is also the CEO of Sage Business Advisors, which is an executive consulting and coaching firm, and she serves on the Board of Regents for the University of Wisconsin. Please welcome Angela Adams. And we're also joined and pleased to have with us Nancy Hernandez, who is the president of the Hispanic Collaborative, which was founded in 2019. In this role, Nancy leads and coordinates more than 150 organizations and individuals who are all working together, seeking to improve the economic opportunities and representations for Latinos in the region. The goal is to move Milwaukee into the top 10 cities in the Hispanic Well-Being Index. We're going to hear about that. She works every day with Latino and non-Latino partners alike, working to align resources and move all of that towards a common goal. Nancy is also the president and founder of a business. She's a business leader in our community, founder of Abrazo Marketing and Communications, which is an integrated marketing firm that works with Hispanic, African American, and Asian audiences, businesses, institutions, and organizations alike. Nancy serves on many boards, including she is a trustee for Marquette University, the Medical College of Wisconsin, and the United Way. Please welcome Nancy Hernandez. So Angela, the floor is yours, and Nancy, and then we'll have a conversation.
Good afternoon. Thank you, JoAnne, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you to the Milwaukee Rotary leadership and all of the members for having both Nancy and myself here today to share and highlight some of our work and the data from our indices. As we share headlines from the data from our respective well-being indices, one key data point that I want to anchor to is the power of one. The power of one. In 2008, one person, Dr. Jeanette Mitchell, our founder, set out to develop Black leaders to increase the confidence and the efficacy of Black leaders in business environments, to ultimately position us to sit at various decision-making tables across the community. And then 10 years later, the power of one, Dan Bader, one of our allies in the work, led the way to bring 80 key stakeholders together, many in the room, sitting here at the table with us, and many AALP, that's our leadership program that JoAnne just talked about, many alumni came together for 3 days as a part of a strategic actioning session, and AALAM was born out of that work. And that really helped to shape our vision around the importance of leadership. And so, as JoAnne has shared, the focus of AALAM is really around building the Black talent pipeline so that we have leaders who can sit at the table and help to shape the outcomes and the work that our benchmark, this well-being index, really speaks to. And so we are very proud that we have now 250 alums sitting at various leadership tables around the city. So as we talk about the well-being index for the African American community, I want to give kudos to the Hispanic Collaborative, because when you see something that's working, you just, borrow from the playbook. And so Nancy will talk about that they're on their 3rd edition of the index, and this is our 2nd. And I'm going to need my glasses for this. So the purpose of this benchmark is how well African Americans are faring in Milwaukee compared to each of the nation's largest 50 metropolitan areas. And as you can see here on the screen, these are the 7 areas of focus that are measured: health, poverty, homeownership, income, employment, educational attainment. And then the bottom line for AALAM in our work is specifically laser focused around business leadership. Now, this is our 2nd index. And what I will say is, as we think about how do we redefine Milwaukee as a top ranking city for African Americans, this is age-old work, generational work, and long-standing issues. So there's not a lot of movement from one index to the other over the past 4 years, but we do think that we're learning some things from the data. So some headlines: the 5 top performing metropolitan areas for African American well-being are Austin, San Jose, Phoenix, Seattle, and Atlanta. What we found is that Atlanta, Phoenix, and Portland showed enough improvement in various areas in the indicator over the past 4 years to move into the top 10. So there's something that we can learn there. The bottom of the rankings remain largely unchanged, and you can see that that's Chicago, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and unfortunately, Milwaukee still remains number 50. On 14 of 44 indicators comprising the index, Milwaukee ranked last or next to last, and it was the worst performing of any of the metro areas in the index. The worst results are income and poverty, employment, educational attainment, and measures of racial disparity. So we are a little bit a ways of even getting to the middle of the pack, let alone to the top 10. It's good for us to look at this data and understand what others are doing to move up the ranks, but also to begin to look at the trends and what's happening here locally. Community health indicators remain troubling. Some worsened from the pandemic in the Black community. And as it pertains to business leadership, we African Americans remain underrepresented in the top echelons of Milwaukee private sector. So, not a lot of positive change from 4 years to this year, but the data doesn't tell the whole story. And so we know that through the work we are doing through the African American Leadership Program and the work that we're doing at AALAM, we know that there are success stories. This the benchmark is a lagging indicator of what happened, what's happening in Milwaukee. But some of the leading indicators speak to the work that we're doing at the leadership program. We know that of the 250 alums, 85% opt to stay here in Milwaukee and to live, work, and play right here in Milwaukee and to help be a part of the change. 69% of our alumni reported that they have had career progression in their various roles. And over 50% of our alumni are serving on boards. As JoAnne said, I started with AALP. I'm a part of cohort 5. We're 14 cohorts later, getting ready to start our 15th. And JoAnne spoke to some of the accomplishments that I've had since the program, serving in the C-suite of one of the largest social enterprises in the country, as well as even now serving on the board of regents. So this work does matter, and it is working. We do have progress. Also, I'd like to say that when we did the strategic actioning session, Tim Sheehy of MMAC was a part of the 80. He was in the room, and a lot of the work around region of choice and the task force came out of those relationships, that thinking, that strategizing. And many of our alums sit on the task force or are champions at various organizations across Milwaukee. And we know that in the first round of region of choice data, that there was success in increasing in management and overall employment for African Americans. And then also the index does show some promising trends, but we think that there may be a pandemic effect to that, so we don't want to overstate the success that we're seeing in some of the trends. But I want to encourage the work that we are doing collectively as a community and think about how we can come together to move the needle on the African American Index. So with that and those headlines, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy to talk about the Hispanic Wellbeing Index. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela, and a great overview of what the index is telling us about the African American community. So I want to talk a little bit about the Hispanic Wellbeing Index, and as Angela mentioned, we created this index because the Greater Milwaukee Foundation had commissioned a study that was a statistical portrait about Latinos over a period of 2 decades. And the Latino community really felt that there should be a set of recommendations from this, and the Latino community should own it. And so we distilled this 200-page document down, working with the statisticians to understand how could we present some data that was actionable, and thus was born the Hispanic Wellbeing Index. So we track now 40, but at the first iteration, 20 variables about our Latino community. We track those same variables in the top 50 metros, and we break that down into a composite ranking. And so we can slice and dice it many different ways. And as Angela talked about, sometimes that's where the learnings are from. You'll see on the screen, I'm showing you who the top 10 are and our most recent edition, which is our 3rd volume of this. I'll point out to you that there are 3 cities there that you should see that are familiar from Angela's slides: Seattle, Austin, and San Jose. So that kind of shows you the power of having these pieces and how we can have further actionable work. The Hispanic Collaborative, what our goal then is to move Milwaukee into a top 10 city. You know, that sounds very wonky, and it's an index, but there's people behind that, and there's real impact and outcomes if we are able to do that. And how we do that is we really track and socialize the well-being index. We want this to be a guide for investment to positively transform our community. We convene and coordinate efforts to address what are those 20% of the variables that we look at from a data standpoint that can help get our community 80% of the way. We want to develop strong partners with shared interests and goals. That could be many of you in this room. And then invest and advocate for our Latino organizations that are already supporting our Latino community, that ecosystem. How do we make them stronger? I will share, this is just a brief slide that pulls 20 of those variables from the index. And I want to show you something that's going on. So behind the chart, you see an upward arrow, and it's green. So that means it's a positive thing. What I'm showing you here are between the first and third editions, how many of these variables moved. And so you have things like the poverty rate. We saw improvement in the poverty rate. We saw improvement in the number of teen births, in home ownership rate, in female employment, right? So there's many of these variables. Most of this chart is green. There are a few that are red that we've seen some declines on. Male employment, both young and old, percentage of concentrated poverty, and mortality rate. But most of it is green. And so that tells a story, right, that we have incremental positive movement along the outcomes on these variables. That should paint a very pretty picture as we think about the Hispanic Wellbeing Index, right, and how we're faring against other cities. Well, we would be wrong, because this slide shares with us how that correlates to ranking. Remember, it's not just us we're looking at what's happening in other cities. And so this is our ranking against those cities. And between the first and third iteration, we've gone from 39, which is not a wonderful spot, but it's definitely stronger than 45, which is what we hold now. And so that's really a key takeaway that I'm hoping many of you walk away with today, that while we've had positive progress, incremental progress on some of the outcomes related to our Latino population, we aren't moving as fast as all of these other 50 metros. And so when we think about our region, when we think about the competitiveness of our region, and what many of you, whether within your organizations or as part of regional and civic efforts, are trying to do, this is an anchor for us, because we have to be moving at least as fast as they are. To also show where we are from a ranking perspective based on those 7 categories. These are the same 7 categories that Angela showed. So there's a lot of comparative points between these indexes. You can see where we rank on each of these. Most of these are, again, in that bottom 10. There is one, the rate of change of indicators, which is sitting at 23. That is a positive thing for us if we think about momentum, and investing in momentum could be a very positive thing for us. So I want to share with you what are some of our top takeaways, right? And then why is this data, or the Wellbeing Index, so important? So the first takeaway I'll say is, across the 3 editions, Milwaukee has remained in a tight range near the bottom of the 50 largest metros, right? Across that time frame, we've stayed pretty close to the bottom 10. The second key takeaway, even though many outcomes are incrementally improving, ranking continues to drop, meaning, again, we're not improving faster than other metros. The third piece, which I'll share Angela alluded to, we're not just studying what's happening with us, we can also study what's happening with other cities. And so we've seen now for 2 iterations, double-digit increases, right? Moving more than 10 spots in a ranking is very possible, and it's demonstrated by other metros, which we can continue to learn from. And we do coordination with other cities and talk with them about what's happening at their communities and maybe things that we could implement here. And then the last key takeaway that I'll share is, there are important positive trends, as I've showed you with some of the things that are moving. And with further investment and intentionality, we can reach a much more different norm here for our Latino communities and regional prosperity. And the size of that is measured by the blue bars that you see on there. So you saw the dark blue bars, which is our ranking, but the light blue bars represent what that potential is, because the top of those bars, or the volume of those bars, are all potential increases that we can have, because we know Latinos right now are achieving those high levels of outcome in other cities. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you both. And so now we're going to get into the Q&A here. Angela, you alluded a little bit, you actually used a phrase that we have talked about before, and that is that data doesn't tell the whole story. Now, we all know in this room data doesn't lie, but I think data doesn't tell the whole story. So can we just talk a little bit about that before we talk more about sort of what the challenges and what your roles are in all of this?
Sure. There has to be context to the data. And usually data is a lagging indicator. So, as we look at the data, it can be easy to misinterpret data without context. And, data is collected by people. So there's bias in data, in the collection process, and how it's analyzed, or even how it can be interpreted. And so, that's why even here today, I was really thinking about where we are in the process of socializing our data. And you are getting our data of the first to see or hear about the highlights. The work that we're doing is similar to what Nancy talked about, is how do we take this back to the African American community and our key stakeholders and really consume this data and wrap context around it to begin to add narrative to how we interpret this data. We have the information that was commissioned by UWM and Dr. Mark Levine, but I think that our respective and unique lived experience of this data will help us to shape that. Additionally, understanding what's happening in some of the other metropolitan cities that are moving the needle in comparison to what we're doing will help us to really tell the story behind the numbers that we see here.
Nancy, what would you add?
So, I'll say that data doesn't tell the whole story, and it is one of the reasons why the Hispanic Collaborative was created. It's always important to remember that behind the data live real people, right? And so we have now decades of data where we're showing there hasn't been much change, much less significant change. And in some cases, I've showed you worsening outcomes. And so, I just showed you a number that had an increase of over $10,000 in median household income for Latino families, roughly 48,000 households. That's a big increase. However, I'll tell you, looking at that same data, real household income for Latinos is behind. It's less than what it was 25 years ago, right? So that's a real household that we're talking about. Real families, real kids, real grandparents, real hopes and dreams, all related to those numbers, which are important to keep in mind. And it's on us. We haven't created the environment where through education or training, these households have lifted themselves out of their space. They're in a worse space. And it's also on us in this room, and I believe that data can help us get there to help get them out as well.
Thank you. So we've talked about the Wellbeing Index, and you've both referenced some of the results. I mean, can you dig into sort of what some of the challenges are? And I love your framing, opportunities and areas that we can grow in. Can you just talk about sort of the why the research, how is it important, and where are some of the initial opportunities that you see going forward? I mean, we clearly have our work cut out for us. And I guess for context, I also wanted to add, we in Milwaukee have seen enormous population growth in our Hispanic population, which is amazing. And we've seen incredible leadership growth too. We have an African American mayor, an African American county executive, a majority common council. So we've seen some of those, as you said, real people behind some of the other statistics that may not sound as promising. So talk more about the index and where the challenges, but where your more immediate opportunities lie.
Yep. So I'll say with the index, so one of the things that we do with the data is we look at which variables that we push on might raise other variables, and that's where we spend our time. So one of those is in median household income. One of the key challenges that I'll share is we start looking at the scale of change that needs to happen. It's not just about putting together a great program, which many organizations have, by the way, of helping somebody gain a job or improve their job or complete schooling. We need to start looking at the numbers behind it because we know what that looks like, right? We know how many people need to be affected to get there. And I'd say looking at the scale of those changes, so for instance, median household income, 15,000 households we need to affect by an increase of $10,000 or more. That's a big number. That's big real change, right? And so by looking at the scale of some of those issues, we need to start talking differently as a community about the scale and investment of the solutions. We can't talk in the millions, $3 million, $5 million programs. We need to start talking like other communities in the 300 million, 400 million combined, public, private, government partnerships for some of these solutions.
Angela, anything to add?
I think Nancy summed it up well. And when we talk about AALAM and the mouthful for AALAM, it was so important that it's African American leaders and our allies, right, that come together to really talk about a shared vision and a commitment across the community to drive change. This is a big lift. Nancy's organization can't do it alone. We can't boil the ocean. But together, under a shared vision, our community can come together and invest to move the needle on Milwaukee.
So it starts with the data. So you say can't do it alone, but here you guys are leading these very unique organizations, not quite alone, but close. And so it really is about collaboration and finding those alliances and marshaling both the human and the tangible resources. Talk a little bit about how you go about your work, each of you. Angela, maybe you could start.
Sure. Thank you. So as as I shared earlier, we are kicking off our 15th leadership program cohort. So the African American Leadership Program is our signature initiative, and that's been the work that we've been doing for the past near 15 years. AALAM is new and newer, and so what we're sharing knowledge with Nancy and understanding how the Hispanic Collaborative built this ecosystem and thinking about, as we produce these 250 plus alums and growing, where are they strategically sitting at the table as we think about cohort 15 and beyond? What leaders do we need to serve as a connector, influencer, broker around this data and making sure that it's being lifted up in various parts of the city. And we need our allies to do the same. So, we have partnerships with some of the major corporate citizens. We have partnerships, both public, private. We are co-located at MMAC along with the Hispanic Chamber and, working with various funders. But to Nancy's point, how do we partner in a much more strategic way across Milwaukee and the region to lift up a larger vision for the work?
Nancy, you want to give some examples maybe of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, if the Hispanic Wellbeing Index is a tool for us to use, the Hispanic Collaborative provides a model by which we as a community can effectively address some of these complex social problems that require multiple sectors and organizations to help solve them. So a couple of examples of that, I'll think of Mercado MKE. So we all lived through the pandemic and understand maybe what some of the challenges for small businesses were. Well, the majority of small Latino-owned businesses did not have e-commerce presence or online presence. So we helped fill that gap and created an online portal along with full wraparound care that during the pandemic to help quickly get Latino businesses online. We have about 125, a little over 125 businesses right now on the Mercado MKE platform. And that program resides and is living with WIBIC, which deals with small businesses all around it, I think, and it's now expanded into a couple different areas. Another example of this is we happen to think commercial real estate kind of hits on all three levers that we're trying to move: civic participation, median household income, and entrepreneurship. We created a conference called Urbano in partnership with higher ed, in partnership with many developer organizations, construction firms, and it's in its fourth year. We're bringing in a speaker that is going to talk about the state of Black and brown developers across the nation. So highly encourage you to come. That'll take place in October. But we also created an emerging developer fund, recognizing, again, through these partners and through community, what some of the key issues are to help jumpstart. You know, we have literally one large Latino developer in Milwaukee. We need that to be a lot more. And so this emerging developer fund helps get folks started in this business in the right way that is hopefully a career starter. The other thing I'll share is, you know, we convene monthly our Latino community-based leaders. One of the things that they identified as a key issue of helping them fund resources and advocacy for their organizations is low Latino voter turnout. Well, there is a plan in place now. By the way, if any of you are interested in funding it, we could use some of those too. But these are the Latino-based organizations partnering to try to push Latino voter turnout to 85% in this next election, which I would absolutely be tickled pink if we can get there. And then certainly our workforce upskilling pilot, which we do in partnership with MATC. We have a lot of recruitment partners there as a pilot to how do we begin to move large scale numbers of people from lower skilled jobs into higher paying jobs. So that's some examples of where I think we've got a lot of success of bringing folks together to address these key issues and finding the right solutions that fix the complexity of the problems.
It's really helpful to have those concrete examples too. So I want to switch a little bit to a subject that I think all of us hear in one way or another at our businesses, in the news, certainly a lot in the news. You can't turn on the TV or the radio without hearing about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about, like, it's in the news for a host of reasons. How? I'm assuming it already has, so I'm going to answer that question. It has probably affected your work, but how does it affect your work? And how does that move forward where DEI is coming up now as, you know, is it a pro? Is it a con? Do we do more? Do we do less? What is it? Who wants to take that one first? I think Angela. No, Angela, you're next. You're first. Sorry. I have these color-coded and I'm losing my place. Sorry. Go ahead, Angela.
Thanks, JoAnne. It's not lost on any of us, that efforts to dismantle this work around diversity, equity, and inclusion is happening not just in our community, in our state, but across the country. And the progress that we are making as a community in the country is becoming even more difficult because it's so political and it's so polarizing, the conversation right now. It puts our employer partners, our allies, even the DEI champions in a tough spot because we all get up every day to do the work that we go to work to do. And with this conversation, people who are leading organizations to drive their mission are starting to have to think twice about investing in DEI, making sure that they have leadership initiatives in DEI without being negatively impacted by external forces and external factors. Again, this is why AALAM is laser focused on leadership. We believe that leading across difference and work that's happening at the top of the organization impacts what happens up, down, and across the organization. So leadership is not just about what you do as an individual, but it's really about what leaders allow to happen within their respective organizations. And so it is negatively impacting investment, funding, capacity, and support. And but we have to continue to press towards the mark around the importance of equity and inclusion.
Nancy?
Yeah, I'll certainly add that it has definitely made it more challenging. You know, while I think folks' hearts and minds are in the same space on it, it has pushed the pause button. For those of us who remember what the pause button was on a CD player or something, you know, the DE&I ruling that came down from the Supreme Court and the subsequent other lawsuits have made most organizations kind of stop and pause and rethink their language, rethink their goals, rethink how do they deal with this preemptively with their own actions and where they need to go as an organization. So it's definitely slowed the boat for all of us, and I think that that's something we need to consider, right? I think that it will pick up and we'll learn our way. I would encourage organizations to have those conversations with us in tandem so we can understand how we may also need to adjust. So I guess things pass muster. But I will say this, one thing that we're not going to be able to get rid of, which may take courage of everyone in this room, is we cannot lose our intentionality or our specificity, because if we lose that, then we won't get anything done, and that's not a good use of our resources. We have to be intentional about what gaps we're trying to close in order to see progress on those.
Thank you. So I'm sure everyone in this room is wondering, like, what would success look like? What will it look like? Obviously, we want to go from, those dark blue bars have to get higher on that chart. Give us some other tangibles of what success will look like as the work continues, and hopefully we can get to that top 10 and we can keep moving the needle upward. Nancy?
Yeah. So I'll say that the beauty of the index is we know what success looks like. It's just in another city right now, right? And we want to bring that here to Milwaukee. But if we can, together with you, bring that here to Milwaukee, what it looks like is 12,000 more college graduates, like right now. Think about having 12,000 more college graduates right here in our system right now. 7,500 more small businesses, 47,000 households with an additional $11,700 more in income, and 33,000 additional voters. Okay, that's happening right now in other cities, but not in ours. So I know we can do it.
Angela?
I don't have that level of specificity that Nancy has, but I would echo, what she's saying. For AALAM, success for us looks like, as we are learning how the collaborative is leveraging this data, building that ecosystem of leaders and leveraging this data to move the needle. The narrative around Black Milwaukee is, we are the worst. We're on the bottom of every good list and on the top of every worst list. And so we're having conversations around how do we change the narrative, right? How do we make sure that Milwaukee is a place that African Americans want to come here to live, work, and play, and that those of us who are here will stay here to move the needle and help Milwaukee to have a positive trajectory for the African American community. Success for us looks like having support from all of you in the room and from partners across the city and the state to move the needle for the Black community in every sector.
We need more alum in the African American Leadership Program for sure. So our last question really is to the audience, and then we'll take questions from you. And that is for you to present to the audience, because everyone in this room is a Rotarian. We call ourselves people of action. We like to roll up our sleeves. We all believe that our strength is in our diversity and our differences, and we come together every Tuesday to get smarter about these subjects. So give our audience a call to action today. What would you tell them? Leave this room knowing this particular call or charge. Angela?
I would say, so as interim president and CEO, AALAM is in a leadership transition. And I'm about 60 days in. And as we're doing that work, we ask you to be thought partners with us. Nancy and I were talking over lunch around much of our role is to go and chase support, chase investment, and chase down partners. And so as Rotarians, I ask you to think about the respective organizations that you lead, the respective boards that you sit on, and take this information back and wrestle with that with your centers of influence and ask yourself, how can you help support, champion, and invest in the work that the Hispanic Collaborative is doing, that the African American Leadership Alliance is doing? How can you find dollars to support a potential African American leadership program participant? We have many Black leaders who want to go through the program, but their organizations may not fund them or have the funding for them to go through that support. So join our network, visit our website. I think you have something on your tables to sign up and stay connected to us, and come to us with thoughts, strategies around how you can plug in to the AALAM community as an ally and a stakeholder to help us move the needle.
And Nancy, you get the final word.
So I'm going to leave you with three things that we want you to think about doing. One is familiarize yourself with the data. So we have it in very academic form right now, but we'll be sharing a user-friendly version of that we'll share with Rotary to get out to you. Read it, share it with others. We want everybody to be familiar with the data and understand the narrative that it shares. The second thing we'll share is have a conversation with us. If we haven't had one with you already, we want to have a conversation with you. We want to better understand what your goals are as an organization, as a company, as an effort or an initiative, and identify where our goals are in common. What are our shared goals? Because we know we have some. Our prosperity depends on each other. And so we want to collaborate with you and fit you into the specific things that we're working on, or connect you with others that better fit with what you're doing and what your goals are, so that we can move and advance the ball together. And then the third piece is, as Angela shared, think about supporting our efforts as we quarterback this process for our community. Many of your organizations might be familiar with the M7 and a little bit of how that's funded out of the MMAC, where organizations can pledge a 3-year pledge to support the efforts, and we share with you what our goals are and work with you and help inform you of how we're doing against those. We have a very similar program that you could do, and that's very digestible in level of investment, anywhere from $2,500 a year to $15,000 a year as an organization, and many hands lighten the load. So we invite you to be a supporter and a partner with us in that way as well.
Thank you, ladies. And now we're going to quickly transition to the audience participation questions from anyone in the audience. But first, let's give a round of applause to our speakers.
Thank you again, Angela and Nancy. Again, we have time for just a few questions, so you can line up behind me to ask a question. And as always, please keep your questions concise and topical.
One area that you did not touch on that is, from an outside perspective, is a major problem in the Black and Hispanic community is education. This is something that, obviously is going to take the whole community to tackle, but there are very, very few good schools that are producing, students that are high quality and they're going to go on to college. I can think of a couple schools. One is St. Augustine Prep, which has 99%. Yeah, okay. The question is, what are you going to do about in the education process, and how are you going to get leaders out of that?
Thank you. So I can share a couple things. So I'll share with you the top two correlating variables to the Hispanic Wellbeing Index and the African American Wellbeing Index are education and segregation. Okay. And education, and I couldn't agree with you more. We need more quality seats in schools. We are supporting organizations and efforts that are moving towards that. I will share with you from the higher ed perspective, there's an issue of dollars, right? These are dollars that aren't sitting in our higher ed institutions or in the households themselves that we'll need to address, because right now we're not maximizing the number of qualified and prepared Latino students today that are graduating. They're not making their way into our higher ed institutions. Both UWM and MATC, their biggest competitor, when you look at who they're losing Latino or students to, is nowhere, right? That's where we're losing them to. They're not pursuing more education, and that's a problem for all of us. So that's a big issue. We are, right now, we're not in the backdrop on some pieces of it, in the forefront trying to get more involved on some other pieces of it and unpack that. And that's going to take every single one of us in the room for us to turn around our education piece here in Milwaukee. Thank you for bringing that up.
Hi, you just mentioned segregation as being the other large issue that's an indicator. When I moved here from Los Angeles almost 25 years ago, that was one of the things that struck me so strongly, was how segregated Milwaukee was as a city. It's not just physical, where people live, there's an economic segregation in the city. What do you think going forward are the major things that we can do, both as a community, as a government, to alleviate that issue and help support the community?
So this is an area where I think we need more community leaders to talk about this and create some actionable plans. I know one of those leaders has been the Greater Milwaukee Foundation, in conjunction with some of the other foundations, doing an initiative called READ since the pandemic. READ stands for Racial Equity Impact Data. They started looking at the data as well, which has really brought together about 35 individuals and organizations to come up with a way of how might we begin to eat the elephant. And so that's an area that I would say be on the lookout for from a READ perspective. Might this be something that we could, if we don't have the leadership to address it from whether it's political leaders or corporate leaders right now, maybe this is something that the community can show leadership in and help movement on this piece, because it's not just the data, it's not just the numbers of segregation that are the issue, it's the effects that segregation has, and how do we talk about a lot of programs that are about mitigating the effects of segregation, but you're right, we need to address that head on.
I'm glad education came up. I was at a press club meeting and a member of the school board was there, and she blamed Madison for our education problems. So maybe they can solve it. The question that Angela asked, what leaders do we need and what is their focus? I think is a key question. And if capital, talent, and hope are all part of the success of any organization, including a city, we have probably one of the most significant investments in the state's history in Microsoft in the Silicon Lakeshore. Could the Silicon Lakeshore and Microsoft and what's happening be a way out for some of the problems that you identified, some of the metrics that you shared on education, on workforce, on poverty? And if it is, what kinds of partnerships would be required to bring people together around that opportunity?
I would say that there's definitely, opportunity there, and I think in that sector, but across the entire landscape of potential partners. To Nancy's point, we have to really sit down and build relationship and have conversation around where do our Venn diagrams cross? What are the synergies between what Microsoft is doing and seeking to invest in and the work that we're doing? And we need, again, I mean, I can't speak to it enough, but the investment in the work, we can come together and we can have conversation. But I find a large part of the challenge and the opportunity is helping to build capacity in order to do this work and to operationalize a lot of the strategies and the ideas. And then we also need to have room for us to fail forward, if you will. There's not going to be a silver bullet. You know, there's iteration and innovation and ideation that's necessary to wrestle with these long-standing issues, whether it's segregation, whether it's educational attainment. You know, I sit on the Board of Regents, and one of the things that we wrestle with is we are 43rd in the nation when it comes to having state funding for higher education, yet our employer partners are looking for us to help supply the workforce of the future for the state of Wisconsin in order to drive the economy. So, you know, how do we come together collectively as leaders to discuss health and well-being, education, income, poverty, segregation? Is going to take a large shared vision and partners to help us hold a larger vision to move the needle on this work.
I just want to add that behind these two ladies, even though they are small organizations, are hundreds of partners and allies. And for the longest time, they were maybe speaking in isolation within their communities. But the good news and the optimism I think that we can all leave the room with today is that it's not just the African American leaders talking to only African American leaders, or the Hispanic Latino community speaking within their own echo chamber. They are speaking with, as I mentioned earlier, allies and partners of like demography and dissimilar demography, and from all parts of our community working together to really come up with what are some of those shared strategies, common goals, and North Stars that we as a community can lift up. So I want to leave everybody at least with that there is no echo chamber here. There is a broad cross-sector of our community now that's come together. And as I mentioned, the MMAC region of choice, our business community has really stepped up and is recognizing that it's about Milwaukee. You know, we've seen Milwaukee on this map big time this year, and we need to keep that momentum going. And I think our business community, in addition to all the other leaders and the seeds that have been planted by leaders like the two that we have here today, are helping drive that forward. So some good news. And President Saj, we're going to let you wrap it up. Thank you, everyone, for being here and listening.